We continue the Colophons with Surah 19. Maryam takes its name from verse 16, that it is of quite early Meccan revelations is established by the following tradition. In the 5th year of the Prophet's mission, the night before Al-Hijra, or the flight to Al-Madinah, a number of the poorer converts were allowed by the Prophet to emigrate to Abyssinia, a Christian country where they would not be subject to persecution for their worship of the one God. This is known as the first Hijra. The rulers of Mecca sent ambassadors to the Najis for their extradition, accusing them of having the religion of their own people without entering into the Christian religion, and having done wrong to their own country. The Najis, against the wish of the envoys, sent for the spokesman of the refugees, and in the presence of the bishops of his realm questioned them of their religion. Ja'afar ibn Abi Talib, cousin of the Prophet, answered, I translate from the account given by... and this is translated from the account given by Ibn Ishaq. We were folk, immersed in ignorance, worshipped idols, eating carrion, given to lewdness, severing the ties of kinship, bad neighbors, the strong among us, preying on the weak. Thus were we till Allah sent a messenger of our own, whose lineage, honesty, trustworthiness, and chastity we knew. And he called us to Allah, that we should acknowledge his unity and worship him, and eschew all the stones and idols that we and our fathers used to worship besides him, and ordered us to be truthful and restore the pledge, and observe the ties of kinship, and be good neighbors, and to abstain from things forbidden, and from blood, and forbid us lewdness and false speech, and to prey upon the wealth of orphans, and to accuse good women, and commanded us to worship Allah alone, ascribing nothing unto him as partner, and enjoining upon us a prayer and legal alms and fasting. And he enumerated for him the teachings of Islam. So we trusted him, and we believed in him, and followed that which had been brought from Allah, and we worshipped Allah only, and ascribed nothing as partner unto him, and we refrained from that which is forbidden to us, and indulged in that which is made lawful for us. And our people became hostile to us and tormented us, and sought to turn us from our religion, that they might bring us back to the worship of idols, from the worship of Allah Most High, and that we might indulge in those iniquities which before we had deemed lawful. And when they persecuted and oppressed us, and had sin, and kept us from the practice of our religion, we came forth to thy land, and chose thee above all others, and sought thy protection, and hoped that we should not be troubled in thy land, O king. Then the Najis asked him, Hast with thee aught of that which he brought from Allah? Ja'afar answered, Yes. Then the Najis said, Is it Negus? Because in English we'd probably just say Najis. Relate to me. And Ja'afar recited to him the beginning of Kaf, Ha, Ya, In, Sad, the opening verse of this chapter, after which it can be named. The Arabic letters with which the surah begins. Such letters are generally used instead of titles by the early Muslimin. Therefore, the surah must have been revealed and well known before the departure of the emigrants for Abyssinia. An early Meccan surah, with the possibility of an exception of verse 59 and 60, which according to some authors were revealed at Al-Madinah. And it's important to note that in Islam, there's the interesting phenomenon of that most things, an overwhelming amount of things, an overwhelming majority of things are lawful. So it's not some, here's a little bit here and there's your carved out spot, and no. Most things are mentioned as lawful. Raha takes its name from the Arabic letters which formed the first verse. As in the case of Surah 19, the early date of revelation is established by a strong tradition. Umar ibn al-Khattab, who afterwards became Caliph, was among the bitterest opponents of Islam in the early days. He set out one day, sword in hand, with the intention of killing the Prophet. This Saba'an, who has split the unity of the Quraysh, calls her ideals foolish and the religion shameful, and blasphemes their gods. There's a difference between blasphemy and, just differing in opinion. The translator that's Alexander Ross makes it sound like the Quran's leveling this charge of blasphemy left and right, but it's really not. When a friend who met him dissuaded him, reminding him that if he slew the Prophet, he would have to reckon with the vengeance of a powerful clan, tribe. Thinkest thou that the Banu Abd Munaf will let thee walk on the earth if thou hadst slain Muhammad? Or tribal pride survived religious difference? Is it not better for thee to return to the folk of thine own house and keep them straight? Omar asked, which are the folk of my house? Thy brother-in-law and cousin, Sa'id ibn Zayd, and thy sister, Fatima, daughter of al-Khattab. 4. By Allah, they are become Muslim and followers of Muhammad as a religion, so look thou to them. So see, people the book, people of certain non-scripture but ethnic-based religions, various other cults, they're still going to, use that singular definitive term for God, whether they're monotheist or polytheist. Follows Muhammad, so looked out at them. Then Omar returned and raged against his sister and brother-in-law, and there was with him in the house Khabab ibn Arit, having with him a leaf of which was written Raha, this surah, which he was reading aloud to them. And when he heard the noise of Omar's coming, Khabab hid in a closet that they had in the house, and Fatima took the leaf and hid it under her thigh. But Omar had heard the sound of Khabab's reading as he drew near the house, and when he entered he said, what was the mumbling which I heard? They said, thou heardest nothing. Omar said, yes, by Allah, and I have already been informed that you become followers of Muhammad in his religion. Then he attacked his brother-in-law, Sa'id ibn Zayd, but Fatima sprang to keep him off her husband, and struck and wounded her. And when he had done that, his sister and his brother-in-law said to him, yes, we are Muslim, and we believe in Allah and his messenger, so do what thou wilt. But when Umar saw the blood upon his sister, he was sorry for what he had done, and he said to his sister, give me that leaf from which I heard you reading just now, that I may see what this is that Muhammad has brought. And Umar was a scribe. When he said that, his sister said, we fear to trust thee with it. He said, fear not. And he swore by those that he considered to be his gods that he would return it to her when he had read it. And when he said that, she hoped for his conversion to al-Islam, but said, O my brother, thou art unclean on account of thine idolatry, and none may touch it, save the purified. Then Umar went out and washed himself. And she gave him the leaf, on which Kaha was written. And he read it. And when he had read it, he said, "How excellent are these words!" and praised it highly. And when he heard that, Kabab came out to him and said, "O Omar, I hope that Allah has brought you in to answer the prayer of the Prophet. For only yesterday I heard him saying, O Allah, strengthen al-Islam with Abu Hukam ibn Hisham or Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Allah is one, O Umar." At that he said, "O Kabab, direct me to Muhammad, that I may go to him and make surrender." The conversion of Umar took place in the 5th year of the Prophet's mission, 9th before the Hijrah, soon after the departure of the emigrants to Abyssinia. At that time, the surah was already written down and in circulation. Surah 21, Al-Anbiya, the prophets. And this is one of the cases Al-Anbiya, sometimes in some instances you see the meme and the noon as options to say that word. It is named from its subject, the history of the former prophets. The speaker in verse 4 and 112 is every prophet. There is no historical reference or tradition to enable us to fix the date. It is undoubtedly of Meccan revelation, and lacks the characteristics of the latest and earliest Meccan surahs. It may therefore be taken as belonging to the middle group of Meccan surahs. قال ربي يعلم القول في السماء والأرض وهو السميع العليم. And قال ربكم بالحق وربنا الرحمن المستعان على ما تصفون. Al-Hajj, the pilgrimage, takes its name from verse 26 to 38, relating to the pilgrimage to Mecca. This surah is ascribed by some authorities to the Meccan, by others the Medinan period. The copy of Al-Quran which I have followed throughout as the Medina inscription, and as it was copied long before the days of higher criticism and was authorized for use throughout the Ottoman Empire, I retained that inscription, verse 11 to 13, 25 to 30, 39 to 41, and 58 to 60 were, according to all authorities, revealed at Al-Medina. Meldek, greatest of the higher critics, in parentheses, because, if you're ignoring certain information like that, how can you be so critical of your thought if you're trying to come up with your own thing, ignoring some of the evidence? Baseless speculation. I want you to not take part in baseless speculation. Naldeka says the ascription is justified on account of the importance of the verses in the surah, which must, from the nature of their contents, have been revealed at Al-Medina, while holding that much of the surah belongs to the late Meccan period. And one of the things that we can say is that, along with chapter 18, it's very essential to the view of the end times and how to respond to it. I'm not sure if the Magog is mentioned in that chapter or not. But we could also say that there's, more to the approach to the hour than that. But those two chapters are the ones to look at. You can look at none else to help you address that approach to the end. Al-Mu'minun, the believers, is so named from a word occurring in the first verse, or it may be said from its subject, which is the triumph of believers. It is considered to be the last of the Suwar revealed at Mecca, immediately before the Prophet's flight to Yathrib, which became known as Al-Medina. Surah 24, An-Nur, the light, takes its name from verse 35 to 40, descriptive of the light of God, as it would shine in the homes of the believers, for the greater part of the surah being legislation for the purifying of home life. All its verses revealed at Al-Medina. Tradition says that verse 11 through 20 relate to the slanderers of Aisha. They slandered her in connection with an incident which occurred in the 5th year of the Hijrah, when the Prophet was returning from the campaign against Banu Mustalik. Aisha, having been left behind on a march and found, brought back by a young soldier, who let her mount his camel, and he himself led the camel. A weaker tradition places the revelation of verse 1 through 10 as late as the 9th year of the Hijrah. The period of revelation is the 5th and 6th years of the Hijrah, and there are, of course, questions. Those who claim certain things that are not in the Quran, what was done after this chapter? Well, obviously the Quran was followed. So if they followed the local law in dealing with adultery, and then until Muhammad had a revelation, then that's what they did. But, there's still people to this day that consider themselves Muslim, that like to levy accusation that that what this chapter says is not true, and that Aisha should be, on the day of resurrection, will be rise to be punished for adultery. And I guess that doesn't take him out of Islam, but that's certainly a serious belief issue. And it's a serious action issue to accuse somebody without witness. Al-Furqan, the criterion, takes its name from a word occurring in verse 1. The subject is the folly of superstition and the craving for miraculous events in face of the wonders of God's creation. It belongs to the middle group of Meccan Suwar, except verse 68 to 70, which were revealed at Al-Medina. And chapter 26, the poets. Ash-Shu'ara, the poets, takes its title from verse 224, which makes this chapter with the second most verses, where the difference between the poets and a prophet is tersely pointed out. Poets being those who say that what they do not mean, while a prophet always practices what he preaches. The misassociating Arabs and the poets believed the poetic inspiration to be the work of jinn. The story of a number of former prophets is here given to console the believers at the time of persecution, with the assurance that it is no new thing for a messenger of God to be persecuted, and that the persecutors always suffer in the end. It shows also that the messengers of God came with the same message. It belongs to the middle group of Meccan Suwar, with the exception of verse 224 to 227, which were revealed at Medina. And one of the things that we need to note that, well, first of all, Muhammad wasn't a composer of any of his own doctrines, like the Bible. Jesus is said to have told people, hey, I didn't compose my own doctrines. So yeah. The words for poetry and prose don't really apply to the Quran. There's issues with that. The word for poetry means that something's been added that doesn't really affect the meaning. You can't even look at the the. Sometimes you make the vowel sound to the count of one, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 5 times, sometimes 6 times. I don't know if there's a I don't know at the moment if there's a 4 times, but that's I guess that's possible too. But even that affects the meaning, and as much as the sound changes with subject changes and stuff like that, it doesn't appear to have, it doesn't do it in the way that would apply to the word for poetry. And honestly, if you've heard Arabic speakers, you know the Quran's not, the Arabic's, as much as there's some great poetry and stuff like that, Arabic's not the language of poetry that, say, like Persian is. That the Farsi and the Urdu seem to be stronger poetic languages, but Arabic is one of the strongest languages for poetry. People could say, but I'm not sure about that. My exposure to Arabic outside of that, well, it's the use of things, really. A numel, the ant, takes its name from the ant mentioned in verse 18. Some commentators, objecting to the miracles, seek to explain the ants in the story of Solomon as an old tribe, the birds as cavalry, Hudhud, the hoopoe, as a man's name, and the jinn as foreign troops. It belongs to the middle group of Meccan Suwar. I'm correcting the plural here if I can. So just like the last chapter, we're seeing some of the middle way of approaching. In Surah 26, the middle way was, approaching the arts, a middle way view of the arts. And another is in dealing with political authority. Well, in mustering authority in social relationships. I guess Surah 28, which as we're using. Al-Qassas. Yeah, it's not this. The story takes us, so here we're talking about not being the one in authority and how dealing with that. It takes its name from a word in verse 25. The name is moreover justified by the nature of the surah, which consists mostly of the story of Moses, his early struggles and ultimate triumph, revealed at a time when the prophet's case seemed desperate. It's one of the last Meccan Suwar. Some of the Arabic writers even say that it was revealed during the Hijrah, while others are of the opinion that verse 85 was only revealed during the flight. A late Meccan Surah, except verse 85, revealed during the Prophet's flight from Mecca to Al-Madinah, and verse 52 to 55 revealed at Al-Madinah. Surah 19, not 19, let me start with 19. Surah 29. Al-Ankabut, the spider, takes its name from verse 41, where false beliefs are likened to the spider's web for frailty. Most of this surah belongs to the middle or the late Meccan period. Some authorities consider it 7 and 8, while others the whole latter portion of the surah to have been revealed at Al-Madinah. It gives comfort to the Muslimin at a time of persecution. Now, its web is truly miraculous, but one of the things that's so miraculous about the spider's web is how strong is the thread that it's made with? But the thing, but it also allows a delicateness that helps it, to firmly lay its trap. So, there's a lot of good and bad symbolism that can come with that. The Romans. Arum. The Romans takes its name from a word in the first verse. The armies of the Eastern Roman Empire had been defeated by the Persians in all territories near Arabia. In the year 613, Jerusalem and Damascus fell, and in the following year, Egypt, a Persian army, invaded Anatolia and was threatening Constantinople itself. In the year 615 or 616 of the Common Era. It's interesting that the number in the book of Revelations, in the earlier versions of the Christian book of Revelations, that they include 616, but 616 and 666 amounts to the same person. So the sixth or the seventh year before the Hijra, but according to the best authorities, this surah was revealed at Mecca. The Arabs triumphed in the news of the Persian victories over the Prophet and his band of followers, because the Christian Romans were believers in one God, whereas the Persians were not. They argued that the power of Allah could not be supreme and absolute, as the Prophet had kept proclaiming it to be, since the forces of the Macedonian Empire had been able to defeat his worshippers. The Prophet's answer was provided for him in this grand assertion of theocracy, which shows the folly of all those who think of Allah as partisan. It opens with two prophecies: that the Romans would be victorious over the Persians, and that the persecuted company of Muslimin and Arabia would have reason to rejoice within 10 years. In fact, in 624 of the Common Era, the Roman armies entered purely Persian territory. And in the same year, a little army of Muslimin, led by the Prophet, overthrew the flower of Arab chivalry upon the field of Badr. But the prophecies are only the prelude to a proclamation of God's universal kingdom, which is shown to be an actual sovereignty. The laws of nature are expounded as the laws of Allah in the physical sphere, and in the moral and political sphere, mankind is informed that there are similar laws of life and death, of good and evil, action and inaction, and their consequences, laws, which no one can escape by wisdom or by cunning. His mercy, like his law, surrounds all things, and the standard of his judgment is the same for all. He is not remote or indifferent, partial or capricious. Those who do good earn his favor, and those who do ill earn his wrath, no matter what may be their creed or race, and no one, by the lip profession of a creed, is able to escape his law of consequences. It belongs to the middle group of Meccan Suwar. The word in Arabic, bid'ah, implies a space of not less than 3 and not more than 9 years. So 3 to 9 years, particular prophecy, the story of one of the companions who laid a bet and was like, well, the phrase allows for this, so at least, have your bet to that, but we're not supposed to be gambling people, it's just Luqman takes its name from verse 12, which contains the mention of wisdom of Luqman, a sage whose memory the Arabs reverenced, but who is unknown to Jewish scripture. He is said to have been an African slave, and the fables associated with this name are so like those of Aesop that the usual identification seems justified. The surah conveys assurance of success to the Muslimin at a time of persecution. It belongs to the middle or last group of the Meccan Suwar, except verse 27 and 28, which were revealed at Al-Madinah. And one of the things we have with that is that there's multiple figures of certain effect throughout history. The prostration, a sajda, takes its name from a word in verse 15. It belongs to a middle group of Meccan surahs. Now, about chapter 30 is we're reminded, the revealed book is reinforced by the book of nature, by the book of ourselves, if we only listen. Chapter 33, yes.